Have you ever wondered why Joseph's dreams caused such hatred in his brothers that they wanted to kill him? Behind those seemingly simple images of wheat sheaves bowing down and celestial bodies, paying reverence, was hidden a divine plan that would forever change the destiny of a family and an entire nation. Today we were diving deep into the hidden meanings behind the most controversial dreams in the Bible and discovering how they reveal much more than we imagine about God's purpose for our lives. Leave in the comments, do you believe God still speaks through dreams today? In the rugged hills of Canaan, where olive trees cast long shadows and shepherds guided their flocks under the scorching sun, lived a young man who would become one of the most influential figures in biblical history. Joseph, the 11th son of Jacob, walked through the family tents wearing something that made him stand out among his brothers: a coat of many colors, a garment that spoke of favoritism and sparked jealousy. The fabric shimmered in the desert light, each thread carefully woven with vibrant blues, purples, and scarlets that only royalty could afford. This wasn't just clothing, it was a declaration. Jacob had chosen Joseph as his heir, the son of his beloved Rachel, the woman he had worked 14 years to marry. The coat represented authority, inheritance, and a future that his 10 older brothers would never have. But it wasn't just the coat that troubled them. Joseph had begun experiencing dreams, vivid, powerful visions that seemed to come from heaven itself. The first dream came on a night when the desert wind whispered through the camp. Joseph saw himself and his brothers gathering wheat in the fields, binding sheaves under the merciless sun. Suddenly, his sheaf stood upright while all the others bowed down around it, as if paying homage to a king. The second dream was even more audacious. This time, Joseph saw the sun, moon, and 11 stars, bowing down to him. In ancient culture, these celestial bodies represented the highest authorities, the father, mother, and brothers of the family. The implications were staggering. Not only would his brothers serve him, but even his father and deceased mother Rachel would somehow honor him. When Joseph shared these dreams with his family, the reaction was explosive. His brothers' faces darkened with rage. How dare this 17-year-old boy, this pampered favorite, claim that they would one day bow before him? Even Jacob, despite his favoritism, rebuked Joseph publicly, though secretly he pondered what these visions might mean. The seeds of hatred were planted deep in the brothers' hearts. They watched Joseph with eyes full of resentment, waiting for an opportunity to silence the dreamer forever. Little did they know that these dreams weren't born of arrogance, but were divine revelations of a future none of them could imagine. To understand the fury these dreams ignited, we must step into the sandals of an ancient Hebrew family and grasp the profound symbolism hidden within Joseph's visions. In the scorching heat of Canaan's wheat fields, where survival depended on successful harvests, the image of grain sheaves carried deep meaning far beyond mere agriculture. Wheat represented sustenance, prosperity, and God's blessing upon a household. When Joseph's sheaf stood tall while others bowed, he wasn't just describing a farming scene. He was proclaiming that he would become the source of provision for his entire family. In a patriarchal society where the eldest son inherited authority and responsibility, this vision was revolutionary and deeply offensive. The second dream pushed the boundaries even further. The sun, moon, and stars weren't random celestial objects in Hebrew understanding. They represented divine order and cosmic authority. The sun symbolized the father's leadership. The moon often represented the mother's nurturing influence, and the 11 stars clearly represented his brothers. By dreaming that these heavenly bodies bowed to him, Joseph was claiming a position above even his father in God's eternal plan. In that ancient world, dreams were considered messages from the divine realm. Kings consulted dream interpreters, and prophets received visions that shaped nations. But for a teenager to claim such grandiose divine communications was seen as the height of arrogance and presumption. His brothers didn't just hear dreams, they heard threats to their inheritance, their status, and their future. The cultural context makes their rage understandable. Joseph wasn't merely sharing interesting nighttime visions. He was declaring divine appointment to leadership over those who should naturally rule over him. The coat of many colors now seemed like a crown, and the dreams like royal proclamations. Every time they saw their younger brother, they were reminded of visions that promised their humiliation and his exaltation. Yet hidden within these provocative symbols was a wisdom that only time would reveal. The God who gave these dreams knew that famine would ravage the land, that Egypt would become a refuge, and that Joseph's future position would literally save the lives of those who now wanted to destroy him. The dreams weren't about Joseph's pride, they were about God's provision. What are your thoughts on the story so far? Do you think Joseph was wrong to share these dreams, or was he simply being obedient to divine revelation? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Years passed like desert storms, and the pampered dreamer found himself in chains, sold into slavery by his own brothers, and falsely accused of assault by Potiphar's wife. Joseph now inhabited the dank, limestone dungeons of an Egyptian prison. The coat of many colors had been replaced by rough prison garments, and the dreams of glory seemed like cruel mockeries of his current reality. But it was in this place of despair that Joseph's true character began to emerge. Gone was the arrogant youth who had flaunted his dreams before jealous brothers. In its place stood a man humbled by suffering, refined by injustice, yet still holding on to faith in the God who had given him visions of a different future. The prison became his seminary, and hardship his teacher. It was here that two fellow prisoners approached Joseph with troubled expressions. The cupbearer and baker of Pharaoh had been imprisoned on charges of plotting against the king, and both had experienced vivid dreams that left them sleepless and anxious. In the flickering light of oil lamps, with stone walls echoing their whispered conversations, they shared their nocturnal visions with the Hebrew slave who had gained a reputation for wisdom. The cupbearer spoke first, describing a vine with 3 branches that budded, blossomed, and produced ripe grapes. In his dream, he had squeezed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and placed it in the king's hand. Joseph listened intently, and then, with a humility that marked his transformation, declared that interpretations belonged to God alone. The dream, he explained, meant that within 3 days, the cupbearer would be restored to his position. The baker, encouraged by this positive interpretation, shared his own vision. He had seen 3 baskets of baked goods on his head, with birds eating from the topmost basket. But Joseph's face grew somber as he received the interpretation. Within 3 days, the baker would be executed, and birds would eat his flesh. Both interpretations came to pass, exactly as Joseph had predicted. The cupbearer returned to his prestigious position in Pharaoh's court, while the baker met his tragic end. Joseph had asked only one favor of the cupbearer: to remember him and speak to Pharaoh about his unjust imprisonment. But as the cupbearer resumed his comfortable life, Joseph was forgotten, left to languish in prison for 2 more years. Yet this apparent abandonment was part of a divine design. In the silence of those additional years, Joseph's character was further refined. He learned patience, developed administrative skills by helping manage the prison, and most importantly, learned to trust God's timing rather than his own understanding. The dreams of his youth had promised greatness, but they had not promised an easy path to that destiny. The throne room of Egypt gleamed with gold and precious stones, its towering columns covered in hieroglyphs that told stories of gods and kings. But on this particular morning, the most powerful man in the known world sat troubled and restless. Pharaoh, ruler of the greatest civilization on earth, had experienced 2 dreams that left him deeply disturbed and desperately seeking answers. In his first dream, Pharaoh stood by the sacred Nile River, the lifeblood of Egypt, watching 7 magnificent cows emerge from the water. These cattle were fat and healthy, representing the prosperity that the annual flood brought to the land. But then 7 other cows appeared, gaunt, ugly, and starved. To Pharaoh's horror, the thin cows devoured the fat ones, yet remained as emaciated as before. The second dream was equally disturbing. 7 heads of grain grew on a single stalk, full and robust in the Egyptian sun. But then 7 thin, scorched heads of grain sprouted and consumed the healthy ones, leaving nothing but withered stalks. Pharaoh summoned every magician and wise man in Egypt, the learned priests who had studied the mysteries of dreams for generations. But none could provide an interpretation that satisfied the troubled king. The dreams felt significant, ominous, like warnings from the gods, but their meaning remained hidden. It was then that the cupbearer, serving wine in the royal court, suddenly remembered the Hebrew prisoner who had correctly interpreted dreams 2 years earlier. With a mixture of guilt and hope, he approached Pharaoh and told him about Joseph, the young man who had accurately predicted both his restoration and the baker's execution. Within hours, Joseph was hastily removed from prison, bathed, shaved, and dressed in clean Egyptian garments. As he stood before the most powerful throne on earth, Joseph looked nothing like the arrogant teenager who had once boasted of dreams to his brothers. Prison had carved humility into his features and wisdom into his words. When Pharaoh described his dreams, Joseph listened with the same careful attention he had shown to his fellow prisoners. But then he spoke words that would change the course of history. "I cannot do it, but God will give Pharaoh the answer he desires." This response was radically different from Egyptian court protocol, where wise men claimed personal knowledge and power. Joseph explained that both dreams carried the same message from God. The 7 fat cows and healthy grain heads represented 7 years of unprecedented abundance coming to Egypt. The 7 thin cows and scorched grain heads warned of 7 years of devastating famine that would follow, so severe that the abundance would be forgotten. But Joseph didn't stop with interpretation. He provided a solution. Egypt must immediately appoint a wise administrator to oversee the collection of grain during the abundant years, storing 1/5 of all harvests in preparation for the coming famine. This stockpiled grain would save Egypt and surrounding nations when hunger ravaged the land. Pharaoh was astounded. Not only had this Hebrew slave provided the interpretation that had eluded all his wise men, but he had also presented a comprehensive survival plan. In a decision that would reshape the ancient world, Pharaoh appointed Joseph as his second-in-command, giving him authority over all of Egypt. Thank you so much for staying with us through this incredible journey. The best is yet to come as we see how God's plan unfolds in the most amazing way. 13 years had passed since Joseph first shared his controversial dreams with his family. The arrogant teenager had become the second most powerful man in Egypt, wearing Pharaoh's signet ring and riding in royal chariots through the bustling streets of Memphis and Thebes. Under his wise administration, Egypt had prospered through 7 abundant years and was now successfully managing a devastating famine that gripped the entire region. The massive granaries that Joseph had constructed held enough grain to feed not only Egypt, but also neighboring nations whose people were starving. Caravans arrived daily from across the ancient world, including the land of Canaan, where an elderly Jacob struggled to feed his large family as crops failed and livestock died. When Jacob learned that grain was available in Egypt, he made a difficult decision. He would send 10 of his sons on the dangerous journey south, keeping only Benjamin, his youngest and now most precious son, safely at home. The 10 brothers who had once sold Joseph into slavery now found themselves desperate, traveling the same route their brother had taken as a captive years earlier. As they approached the Egyptian border, dusty and travel-worn, they could never have imagined that their fate lay in the hands of the brother they had betrayed. Joseph, now clean-shaven in Egyptian fashion and speaking through interpreters, was unrecognizable to them, but he recognized them immediately, and the memories of his childhood dreams came flooding back with stunning clarity. The brothers prostrated themselves before the Egyptian governor, their faces touching the ground in complete submission. In that moment, the first dream was fulfilled exactly as God had revealed it. The sheaves of wheat had indeed bowed down, but not in the way anyone had expected. Joseph's position as provider of grain had made his brothers literally bow before him for survival. Through a series of carefully orchestrated encounters, Joseph tested his brothers' character. Had they learned from their past cruelty? Would they abandon Benjamin as they had abandoned him? When Judah offered to become a slave to protect Benjamin, Joseph saw that genuine transformation had occurred in his brothers' hearts. Finally, unable to contain his emotions any longer, Joseph revealed his identity. "I am Joseph, your brother, whom you sold into Egypt," he declared, his voice breaking with tears. The brothers were terrified, expecting vengeance. But Joseph spoke words that revealed the hidden meaning behind all his dreams and sufferings. "Do not be afraid, for am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." When Jacob learned that Joseph was alive and ruling in Egypt, the elderly patriarch made the journey south with his entire household. As the great man who had wrestled with God bowed before his son in the Egyptian court, the second dream reached its complete fulfillment. The son had indeed bowed to Joseph, not in humiliation, but in recognition of God's amazing plan. The dreams that had once seemed like the fantasies of an arrogant boy were revealed to be precise prophecies of divine providence. Every detail had meaning. The wheat sheaves represented Joseph's role as provider during famine. The celestial bodies represented his family's eventual dependence on his position, and the years of suffering had prepared him to save the very people who had sought to destroy him. Joseph's story teaches us that God can use even our most painful experiences to accomplish his greater purposes. What lessons from Joseph's life have touched your heart the most? Share your reflections and personal experiences in the comments below. If this deep analysis has blessed your life, do not forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell, so you won't miss any content. In our next video, we'll explore another fascinating biblical character. If you'd like to know about the life of a specific person, leave your suggestions in the comments. Until next time, remember that God's plans for your life may be hidden in what seems like your greatest challenges,